Well, I'm rumbling in this JCB. I'm 5 years old, my dad's a giant sitting beside me, and the engine rattles my bum like berserk while we're singing, don't forget your shovel if you want to go and work. My dad's probably had a bloody hard day, but he's being good fun and bubbling and joking way. And the procession of cars stuck behind are getting all impatient and angry, but we don't mind. We're holding up the bypass, oh, me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, 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 sitting on the toolbox, oh. And I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school, oh no. And we pull over to let the cars pass, and pull off again, speeding by this summer green grass. And we're like giants up here in our big yellow digger, like Zoids or Transformers, or maybe even bigger. And I wanna transform into a Tyrannosaurus Rex and eat up all the bullies and the teachers and their pets. And I'll tell all my mates my dad's B.A. Baracus, only with a JCB and Bruce Lee's nunchuckers. And we're holding up the bypass, oh, me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, 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 sitting on the toolbox, oh. And I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school. And we're holding up the bypass, oh, me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, oh, I'm sitting on the toolbox, oh. And I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school. Said I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round and we're holding up the bypass, whoa, and me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, whoa. And I'm sitting on the toolbox, oh. And I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school. I said I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his, I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB.
When the Ferguson TE20 was launched in 1946, it was more than just another tractor. It introduced British farmers to a whole new concept of mechanised agriculture. This concept was known as the Ferguson system, and the man behind it was Harry Ferguson. While horses and other early tractors dragged their implements by a drawbar or length of chain, the Ferguson and its equipment operated as a single unit. Not surprisingly, the Little Grey Fergie, as it affectionately became known, was an instant success, and over 500,000 were built.
Harry Ferguson was most ingenious Irishman, quite a cantankerous individual, but he developed a system of carrying the implement on the tractor which has revolutionized world agriculture. There's absolutely no doubt about that. There's not a tractor today from 10 horsepower to 600 horsepower that doesn't have that basic three-point linkage for carrying the implement. Prior to Harry Ferguson's development of the three-point linkage, of course, we had very large, heavy tractors because it was the weight and the power that managed to pull the implement across the land. The three-point linkage did away with that because the weight was transferred from the linkage onto the wheels. And in fact, the Ferguson tractor replaced the horse on most farms in the United Kingdom.
The hydraulic systems fitted to today's modern tractors still use the same fundamental principles as the original Ferguson design, even though they are now operated by electronic and push-button controls. The hydraulic system and three-point linkage was at the very heart of the Ferguson tractor. The linkage both pulled and carried the implement, transferring its weight onto the tractor's rear wheels. Forces pushing forward on the top link also kept the front wheels on the ground. This made the Ferguson tractor very stable and safe because it was unlikely to rear up if the plough hit any buried obstructions. Some tractors working with trailed machines had been known to turn over. The Ferguson hydraulic system was a simple design. The lift arms were raised by a ram operated by oil from a pump housed inside the tractor's transmission. It also incorporated a system of automatic depth control, which today is usually known as draft control. The working depth of the implement was regulated by a sensing valve connected to the top link, which governed the oil flow from the pump to the ram. With the system disconnected, the tractor is almost useless. It is unable to control the depth of the plough or transfer the weight of the implement onto the rear axle, resulting in excessive wheel spin. With the system restored, the Ferguson and its implement operate together as a single unit. The tractor controls the depth of the implement, and the implement transfers its weight to the tractor's wheels, giving it excellent traction without the need for extra ballast. This meant that the Ferguson tractors could be built lighter and were more stable and more maneuverable than most other tractors on the market. The Ferguson system of hydraulic control was an important milestone in tractor development and was eventually adopted in some form by most of the world's major tractor manufacturers. The system was the brainchild of Harry Ferguson. Brought up on his father's farm near Dromore in County Down, he developed an aptitude for things mechanical. He became involved in racing cars and motorcycles, and even built and flew the first aeroplane in Ireland. By the time of the First World War, Ferguson owned his own garage in Belfast and held the agency for American overtime tractors. Experience gained working with these machines and other tractors convinced him of the disadvantages and dangers of simply hauling a plough by a length of chain or drawbar. The plough, he maintained, must become an integral part of the tractor. Ferguson's early experiments with ploughs and hitches led to his first hydraulically operated three-point lift, which he fitted to a Model F Fordson tractor in 1925. This linkage arrangement controlled the position of the implements by monitoring the forces operating on the lower links and was very close to the final Ferguson design. Ferguson tried, without success, to persuade several tractor manufacturers to put his hydraulic system into production. Eventually, he realized that the only way forward was to design and build his own tractor. The prototype for the first Ferguson tractor was completed in 1933. It was assembled in Belfast from components bought from several suppliers and powered by an American Hercules engine developing 18 horsepower. At Harry Ferguson's insistence, it was painted black and is usually referred to as the Ferguson Black Tractor. After seeing this prototype, the gear manufacturer, David Brown of Huddersfield, offered to produce it for Harry Ferguson. The company had already supplied the gears for the transmission, rear axle and steering box for the prototype black tractor. With a few modifications, and sporting a new battleship grey colour scheme, the Ferguson was put into full production in 1936 as the Type A. A new firm called David Brown Tractors was set up to build the tractor at the company's Park Gearworks. Another concern, Harry Ferguson Limited, was formed to handle the sales and marketing. Consequently, the Type A is usually referred to as the Ferguson Brown. The Ferguson Brown was similar in design to the Fordson tractor and was built using the principle of unit construction, with the cast housings of the engine, gearbox and rear transmission forming the backbone of the tractor. However, the Ferguson was a much lighter machine. It was made from aluminium castings and weighed only 16.5 hundredweight, compared with the 30 hundredweight Fordson. The Ferguson Brown was powered by a British-built petrol engine, bought from Coventry Climax. Known as the Type E engine, it was a 4-cylinder side valve unit that produced 18 to 20 horsepower. It had a Solex carburettor and was fitted with magneto ignition. Naturally, the tractor had Harry Ferguson's hydraulic lift and linkage. The system had been improved and now had top-link sensing, with the control valve operating on the suction side of the pump. However, the pump was driven off the gearbox, which meant that the lift would operate only when the tractor was moving. Independent steering brakes were fitted to give a tight turning circle, and the gearbox had 3 forward gears and a single reverse gear, which gave working speeds from 1.5 to 5 miles an hour. Production of the tractor at Huddersfield began slowly, but eventually increased to about 10 a week. When just over 250 had been built, David Brown began to introduce its own engines. It had bought the patterns for the engine from Coventry Climax and had the castings made at a new foundry at Penistone. The David Brown engine had a larger sump to increase oil capacity and aid lubrication. It was also more powerful than the Coventry Climax version and had a 3 1/4 rather than the 3 1/8 of an inch bore. This tractor has the optional oil cleaner. A Gladwell vaporizer was later offered for running on paraffin. 500 tractors were built during the first year, but they didn't sell as well as expected. The Ferguson sales company soon ran into financial difficulty and was merged with the manufacturing side to form Ferguson Brown Tractors in June 1937. The Ferguson Brown had several major problems. Some of its aluminium castings suffered from metal fatigue, which led to expensive failures. And the vaporizer was not very efficient, which meant that the engine lacked power when it was running on paraffin. The fact that the implement couldn't be lifted until the tractor was moving was another disadvantage. However, the main stumbling block to sales was the price of the tractor and of its equipment. The Ferguson Brown cost £224, while the Fordson was nearly £80 cheaper. And to make things worse, the Fordson could be used with any adapted horse-drawn or trailed equipment that the farmer already owned, whereas the Ferguson needed its own special implements, which cost another £26 each. Only 1,350 Ferguson Browns were built, and production came to an end in 1939 following the breakup of the partnership. Harry Ferguson was obsessively protective of his designs and had quarrelled with David Brown over proposed changes to the tractor. The David Brown Company forged ahead with plans to build a more powerful tractor of its own design, but Harry Ferguson had already met Henry Ford in America to discuss an American-built tractor. This meeting had taken place the previous year at Dearborn in October 1938 and resulted in the famous Handshake Agreement. Ford undertook to manufacture a tractor incorporating the Ferguson hydraulic system, while Ferguson was to handle the sales and marketing. The agreement was no more than a verbal understanding between the two men. It was sealed with a handshake, and no written contracts were ever drawn up. The Ford Ferguson was launched in June 1939. Ford's engineers had carried out much of the design work, while Harry Ferguson returned to England to terminate his partnership with David Brown. Because the Ford Ferguson was rushed into production, the steel presses for several of the parts were not ready when the first tractors were being made. This meant that the first 700 or so were fitted with cast aluminium bonnets rather than steel ones. This one, which is still being restored, is waiting for its side panels, front grille and badges. In true Ford fashion, the tractor incorporated several car components to keep costs down. Its four-cylinder side valve engine developed 23 horsepower and was based on half of a Ford Mercury V8 engine. It had electric start with a battery, generator and coil ignition. The gearbox was a 3-speed unit, and the tractor had independent drum brakes and an extendable front axle and adjustable rear wheels for altering track width. Rubber tyres, power takeoff, and of course the Ferguson system hydraulics were fitted as standard. Unlike the Ferguson Brown, the Ford Ferguson's hydraulic system worked when the tractor was stationary, because the pump was powered by the drive to the PTO shaft. This Ford Ferguson is working with a Ferguson Lister planter for sowing maize, corn or cotton. The Ford Ferguson was more properly known as the Ford 9N. 9 signified the year of introduction, 1939, and N was Ford's designation for tractors. It carried 2 bonnet badges. At the top was the Ford oval, and underneath this was a plate bearing the legend Ferguson system to satisfy Harry Ferguson. With the exception of the first few hundred tractors, all 9Ns had steel bonnets. The tractor was not expensive at $585. It appealed to the American farmers, who were more receptive to new technology than their British counterparts and liked its modern styling and lightweight design. Over 10,000 were sold in the first year, and production continued to rise. This 9NAN model is fitted with a vaporizer for running on TVO, and was shipped to the UK under the wartime Lend-Lease agreement. By late 1941, wartime restrictions and steel shortages were hampering 9N production. In answer to this, Ford relaunched the tractor as a utility model known as the 2N. It had no electrics and was fitted with steel wheels and magneto ignition. As restrictions eased, the 2N came out on rubber tyres with electric start and coil ignition. Now almost identical to the 9N it had replaced, it could be identified by the long slots in the centre bar of the front grille. Nearly 300,000 Ford Fergusons were built. The 9N and 2N line came to an end in July 1947, but not before Ford and Ferguson had collaborated on one more model. This was designated the 4P and was a larger version of the Ford Ferguson design. 5 prototypes were built, all using Continental petrol engines. No plans were made to put it into production, and the tractor is believed to have been shelved because Ford and Ferguson's engineers couldn't agree over the design. The eventual replacement for the Ford Ferguson was the Ford 8N, outwardly a very similar machine, with the exception of a new colour scheme. However, the 8N was a Ford tractor bearing no allegiance to Ferguson. Although the 8N was planned to be released in 1948, it was rushed into production and launched in July 1947 after the Ford Motor Company terminated its agreement with Harry Ferguson. The tractor operation had been losing a considerable amount of money and, rightly or wrongly, Ferguson was blamed for much of that loss because of the cut taken by his distribution company. The 8N boasted 22 new features, including a 4-speed gearbox. Controversially, its hydraulic system, although altered and fitted with position control, was still very similar to Harry Ferguson's design. Ferguson, alleging that his agreement had been illegally terminated and that his patents were infringed, took Ford to court, claiming $251 million in damages. The following legal battle was vicious and prolonged, lasting for over 4 years, until Ford eventually settled out of court for $9.25 million. Although the Ferguson tractor was no longer built in America, production had started again in Britain. This new British machine was known as the TE-20. It was built for Ferguson by the Standard Motor Company of Coventry, which set up production in a large disused factory in Banner Lane that had been used for the manufacture of aero engines during the Second World War. This heralded the beginning of a golden age for Ferguson tractors. TE stood for Tractor England, and 20 was its approximate horsepower. It was introduced in 1946 and was very similar in design and size to the Ford Ferguson, but was fitted with a 4-speed gearbox. Its main feature, of course, was Ferguson system hydraulics. Early TE-20s used imported North American petrol engines made by the Continental Motors Corporation. These Z120 overhead valve engines had a 6-volt electrical system with coil ignition and electric start. Tractors fitted with the Continental engine can be distinguished by the slight bend in the exhaust pipe just below the manifold. The TE-20 was part of a complete system of mechanized farming, and Ferguson claimed that it was the sign of a new prosperity in agriculture. The tractor cost just over £300 and was available with a range of matched equipment. At first, just 3 ploughs and 13 other implements were available. This front-mounted manure loader and manure spreader were added when the range was extended in about 1949. In June 1947, the TEA-20 was born. It had a new British petrol engine based on a power unit designed for the standard Vanguard car. Like the Continental engine, which was slowly phased out, it had an 80mm bore. With a demand for increased food production following the Second World War, and the move towards more mechanised agriculture in Britain, the little grey Fergie met with instant acclaim. Its design suited the smaller farmer, and it was a boon to the hillside crofts and holdings in Scotland and Wales. Over 50,000 were sold on the home market during the first 3 years of manufacture, and thousands more were exported all over the world. Much of the success of the tractor was due to the complete farming system offered by Ferguson. There was a full range of implements, equipment and accessories, all backed up by a dealer network with first-class service and spares support. But the little things also counted. Each implement had its own instruction and parts book, and to help with finances, a Ferguson pay-as-you-farm hire purchase plan was available. Just 2 examples of Harry Ferguson's meticulous attention to detail. Not all farmers were happy about buying a tractor that ran on petrol, because it was a fairly expensive fuel. Therefore, in 1949, Ferguson introduced the TED-20, which ran on TVO, or tractor vaporizing oil. TVO was an economical and cheap paraffin distillate. This tractor had a dual-compartment fuel tank, which was easy to get at by opening the tilting bonnet. The rear compartment held petrol, which was used for starting. Once the engine was warm, it was changed over onto TVO, contained in the main tank. The TED-20 standard engine had a low compression cylinder head. It was also fitted with a vaporizer and a heat shield, which allowed the fuel mixture in the intake manifold to be warmed by the exhaust gases. This was because TVO was a heavy fuel that had to be heated up until it vaporized before it would burn properly. As TVO was less efficient, the engine's bore was increased to 85 millimeters to compensate for power loss. Safety was an important aspect in the design of Ferguson tractors. For example, the starter was engaged by a safety switch operated by the gear lever, which meant that it was impossible to start while it was still in gear. In addition to the TED-20, Ferguson also produced the TEH-20 lamp oil tractor for export only. It had a further modified cylinder head for running on zero-octane paraffin in countries where petrol or TVO were not cheaply available. This TED-20 is fitted with the Ferguson high-lift loader, often called the banana loader because of its distinctive shape. It was introduced with a new range of Ferguson implements in 1951. By 1953, this range of Ferguson equipment had grown to nearly 70 different implements and attachments, covering the needs of most specialist markets. Tractors designed for these specialist markets included the narrow Ferguson, introduced in 1949 for the orchard, hop-growing and horticultural industries. This narrow TEC-20 model has the standard petrol engine. TEE-20 TVO and TEJ-20 lamp oil variations were also available, and a very few narrow TEB-20 models fitted with the Continental engine were also built. The overall width of the tractor was reduced by 6 inches by fitting specially cast shortened trumpet housings and half shafts. It also had cramped lift arms and a modified front axle and tie bars. Steel hubcaps protected the growing crops from damage by the front wheel hubs and nuts. This tractor is fitted with the optional Lucas lighting kit from the Ferguson range of accessories. It also has a Howard reduction box, which doubled up the gears and gave lower working speeds. The 30 hundredweight trailer was another piece of equipment from the extensive Ferguson range. This is the tipping version, which cost £135. Another advantage of the Ferguson hydraulic system was that it could be fitted with an oil pipe and coupling for operating external hydraulic equipment and tipping trailers. As well as lighting kits, the comprehensive range of Ferguson tractor accessories also included a belt pulley attachment, a vertical exhaust pipe, a canvas tractor cover, an automatic hitch assembly, wheel weights, tyre girdles and steel wheels, to name but a few. Tractor wheels could be changed with another Ferguson accessory, an ingenious tractor jack. After coupling one part of the frame to the lift arms and putting the other under the engine and radiator support, the tractor's hydraulic system raises all 4 wheels off the ground. In January 1951, after nearly 250,000 TE20s had been sold, the petrol engine had its bore increased to 85mm, in line with the TVO and lamp oil models. 5 months later, in June, bowing to pressure from its customers, the company also introduced a Ferguson diesel engine. This engine produced 28 horsepower and was still based on the Standard Motor Company's Vanguard power unit. The modifications were carried out by Freeman Sanders, which used a system of indirect injection with spherical combustion chambers in the revised cylinder head. It had an inline CAV fuel injection pump, and the cylinder bore was 81mm. The new diesel model was known as the TEF-20. It was launched with a 12-volt electrical system, and the petrol, TVO and lamp oil tractors were altered from 6-volt to 12-volt starting at the same time. Because of the increased dimensions of the diesel engine, there was no room under the bonnet for the 2 6-volt batteries, and on the TEF-20 these had to be repositioned either side of the driver's seat. The transmission also had to be modified to take the new engine. Diesel engines were cheaper to run and more reliable than petrol or TVO engines, but on the downside, they were more complicated and more expensive to build. This TEF-20, working with a set of Ferguson heavy-duty reversible disc harrows, was bought in 1953. It cost £532, while the TEA-20 petrol model at that time was only £395. The narrow tractor was still too wide for several applications, and so a vineyard model was added to the Ferguson range in 1952. This is sometimes called the extra narrow and was designed for cultivating in vineyards, sugarcane and fruit crops. This TVO vineyard was known as the TEL-20. The petrol model was designated TEK-20, while the TEM-20 had a lamp oil engine. Ferguson never produced factory-built diesel versions of either the narrow or vineyard tractors. The overall width of the vineyard model was reduced to 46 inches. Like the narrow tractor, it also had a modified front axle and shortened rear half-shafts. 24-inch rear and 15-inch front wheels and tyres were fitted as standard to give the tractor a lower profile. This TEL-20 also has a Howard reduction box. The bonnets on the vineyard models had to be lengthened by 4 inches because the tractors were fitted with an extra support casting. This moved the radiator forward to make room for the modified front axle and the closer steering arms. The rear linkage was also altered, and this tractor has the cramped lift arms that were unique to the narrow models. Ferguson built a range of TE-20 industrial and semi-industrial models in addition to the agricultural tractors to suit various specialist markets and applications. They were introduced in 1951 and were an instant success. Industrial users liked their reliability, and their automotive design made them easy to drive, economical to run, and simple to maintain. The duties they performed included building and construction work, and general haulage in factories and docks. They were also used to move aircraft and shunt railway wagons. This TET-20 diesel model was used for municipal work in Surrey. It has a lighting kit, special highway mudguards, and industrial tyres. It is also fitted with a tractor meter, a rev counter and engine hours recorder driven by a flexible cable from a modified dynamo pulley. The 3-ton Ferguson trailer was also designed for industrial use. It has a sprung axle, mudguards and overrun brakes, and this one spent its working life with Somerset County Council. Many local authorities used these industrial tractors for transport, refuse collection, and road, park and playing field maintenance. The range of accessories and options for the Ferguson industrial tractors meant that each machine could be tailored to the customer's individual requirements. The variations were endless, from a basic agricultural tractor on industrial tyres to a full specification industrial tractor with all the bells and whistles. This TET-20 has the industrial fenders and the spring-cushioned front bumper designed for shunting. The Hydrovane 60 compressor with the hedge cutter was part of a growing range of Ferguson implements that had both agricultural and industrial uses. The company also approved a number of machines supplied by outside manufacturers. Heavy-duty 600 by 16 tyres have been fitted to the front wheels, and the rear ones have special grass tyres. This TEP-20 petrol model has many of the standard and optional features usually found on industrial tractors. The full-width mudguards, front and rear, were designed to comply with the UK Road Traffic Act. So was the dual braking system. There was a mechanical handbrake next to the seat, and the foot brakes were hydraulically operated. The choice of towing equipment included this heavy-duty drawbar attachment. The industrial range also included the TER-20 with a TVO engine, and for export only, a TES-20 lamp oil model. This industrial TEP-20 spent its working life sweeping the roads at a quarry in Leicestershire. The front-mounted Sturdilux sweeping brush was approved Ferguson equipment. It's powered by an undermounted propeller shaft driven by a chain off the tractor's rear PTO. The brush is raised or lowered by a wire rope connected to the lift arms. A useful passenger seat has been fitted to this 1954 TEP-20 industrial tractor, which was originally used by a London Borough Council for driver training. This tractor also has industrial fenders and the dual braking system with two independent pairs of brakes operating separate shoes inside the rear brake drums. Forestry was another application in which the industrial model excelled. A Ferguson PTO winch could exert a pull of up to 7,000 pounds. Several conversions for the TE-20 were marketed by other manufacturers. These included a conversion pack from Perkins of Peterborough, which contained all the necessary parts to fit a Perkins P3 TA diesel engine into the tractors. This was for farmers who wanted to move with the times and change their old TVO or petrol Fergusons over to diesel power. This Ferguson with the P3 conversion is powering a hedge cutter with compressed air from a Hydrovane 25 compressor. The three-cylinder Perkins P3 engine was introduced in the early 1950s. It was economical and reliable and produced over 30 horsepower. It slotted neatly into the Ferguson using an adapter plate to mate it to the bell housing. But because the P3 was higher than the original engines, the bonnet had to be altered and raised with a new metal insert fitted over the dashboard. This gave the TE-20s with the P3 conversion a very distinctive profile. This tractor also has a Ferguson epicyclic reduction gearbox and live PTO unit sandwiched between the normal gearbox and the transmission housing. This was designed for low speed and continuous PTO work, and was another item from the Ferguson accessory range. The P3 was a popular conversion for the TE20 because the TEA and TED tractors couldn't easily be modified to take Ferguson's own standard diesel engine. Perkins also experimented with other diesel conversions for the TE20. This Ferguson, found languishing in a yard near Peterborough, is believed to be a Perkins development tractor, and one of only two which were fitted with a Perkins 4-cylinder 499 engine. A hole had to be cut in the bell housing to accommodate the starter motor. It was a powerful machine, but Perkins decided not to market the conversion. Reiki Engineering from Arbroath in Scotland started converting a number of TE20s into narrow tractors in 1948. The founder of the company, John Reiki, was a Ferguson distributor. He devised the conversion after being approached by several raspberry and soft fruit growers from the northeast of Scotland. These growers asked for a tractor that was no more than 40 inches wide. Reiki modified the tractors in his own workshops. Substantial alterations were made to the front axle layout. The tie bars were reprofiled, and the tin work was cut away around the radiator so that the steering arms could be brought in closer. And to reduce the width at the back, the rear axle half shafts were cut and re-welded. He charged £250 for the conversions, which were known locally as berry tractors. Demand for the Reiki conversions dwindled after Ferguson launched the Vineyard model in 1952. There were many other Ferguson conversions, including the Italian Cellini four-wheel drive, and the track pack crawler built in 1951 by George Bryden Engineering of Leeds. Only a year separates the age of these two TEF-20 tractors. The badge on the dashboard of the 1953 model on the right bears Harry Ferguson's name. The tractor on the left is a 1954 model, and it is virtually identical except for a few minor detail changes, including the provision of a lift pump. However, its maker's plate carries the name Massey Harris Ferguson. The reason for this was simple. In August 1953, Harry Ferguson had sold his worldwide interests in Ferguson to the Canadian farm equipment manufacturer Massey Harris. The two companies were merged, and Massey Harris Ferguson was formed on the 30th of January 1954. There were no immediate plans to amalgamate the grey Ferguson with the red Massey Harris equipment. The two lines continued unchanged, and the dealers were instructed to maintain their separate identities. Harry Ferguson's decision to sell out was a sudden one. He was approaching the age of 70 and had no son to take over from him. His American interests were also becoming a drain on his resources. He felt that the merger with Massey Harris would secure the future of the company. Harry Ferguson was made chairman of the new company, but he resigned 3 months later in April 1954 after clashing with the Massey board over future designs. After this, he devoted his time to working on automotive transmissions and four-wheel drive systems for Harry Ferguson Research. One casualty of the merger was the proposed larger TE60 tractor, which Ferguson had developed as the LTX prototype. The Massey board ruled against putting it into production, which caused the rift with Harry Ferguson. The Massey-Harris-Ferguson merger did not affect the Standard Motor Company's arrangement to build the TE20 tractor at Banner Lane. However, Standard was concerned that any future rationalisation of the Ferguson and Massey tractor lines might see it losing the very profitable operation to the Massey-Harris factory in Kilmarnock. Also, there was talk of the new company buying out Perkins, which meant that Massey-Harris-Ferguson would probably no longer be a customer for Standard's engines. With all this in mind, Standard began to plan for the future with its own tractor designs. Although this rare machine looks similar to the Ferguson, it is one of two pairs of prototype Standard tractors built in about 1958. It is fitted with the standard 23C diesel engine and has a 4-speed gearbox mated to an epicyclic reduction box. Both are controlled by the single gear lever, which operates two sets of selectors. It has inboard disc brakes, live power takeoff, and the lever on the right of the seat has two separate gates for draft and position control hydraulics. The fuel tank was borrowed from a standard Atlas van. Massey Ferguson eventually acquired Perkins in 1959, but in the same year it also bought Banner Lane and all its manufacturing facilities from the Standard Motor Company, which then dropped its own tractor designs. After the 1953 merger, Massey-Harris-Ferguson produced the TE20 for another 3 years. This 1956 TE-F20 model on Ferguson half-tracks was one of the last to be built. Production ended in October 1956, after 517,651 had been built and sold throughout the world, and the little grey Fergie had become a legend in its own lifetime. In the autumn of 1956, 7 TE-20s, equipped with Canadian Bombardier tyre tracks, similar to this half-track attachment, were sent to various polar expeditions in the Antarctic. In 1958, 3 of these tractors completed a 1,200-mile trek to the South Pole with an expedition led by Sir Edmund Hillary. In addition to the Coventry-built tractors, a few TE-20s were made by Massey-Harris-Ferguson in France. These were assembled at Saint-Denis near Paris by Hotchkiss, a French car manufacturer associated to the Standard Company. They used Standard's petrol or diesel engines, as well as a number of parts sourced locally in France. The French Ferguson was known as the FF30. 3 versions were available: the Standard model, the Étroit or narrow, and the Vineyard. This is the FF30 GV Vineyard model with a petrol engine. Outside Europe, Harry Ferguson had set up a factory in Detroit in 1948 to build an American version of the TE20. The American tractor was known as the TO20, standing for Tractor Overseas, and used the same Continental engine that had powered the early British TE20s. The TO20 was replaced in 1951 by the TO30, with a slightly larger 129 cubic inch Continental engine. This TO35 model followed in 1954, with several improvements. The 3-speed gearbox and dual-range epicyclic unit in the new transmission gave 6 forward and 2 reverse gears. The deluxe version of the tractor also had live power takeoff and hydraulics, provided by a 2-stage clutch. The hydraulic system was completely revised with an uprated pump and what Ferguson referred to as quadramatic control. This consisted of 2 operating levers, one to set the draft and a main lever to control position and speed of response. Steering was easier and more efficient with a new recirculating ball-type mechanism, and the tractor was powered by a new Continental Z134 petrol engine, producing 32 horsepower. There was a deluxe padded seat for extra comfort, and the TO35 was finished in a new grey and green colour scheme. This tractor is working with a Ferguson high-speed rotary hoe. After the Massey-Harris-Ferguson merger, the North American Massey dealers asked if they could also sell a tractor incorporating the Ferguson system. The result of this request was the Massey-Harris 50, launched in 1956. The same tractor was also fitted with different tin work for the Ferguson dealers, who sold it as the Ferguson 40. The cream and red livery was a new departure from battleship grey. The Massey 50 and the Ferguson 40 were based on the TO35 and used its 134 cubic inch Continental petrol engine. However, they were 4 inches longer and were built to a row crop configuration. These tractors were also heavier and stronger, with hub reductions on the rear axle. Both tractors had a revised steering arrangement and a beam-type front axle. Power steering was an optional extra. The 4-wheel tractor wagon was another American Ferguson product. The 40 was also available in tricycle form, with single or V-twin front wheels. This high-clearance model has the high-arch front axle and was known as the Ferguson High 40. Both the Massey and the Ferguson versions had Ferguson's hydraulic system, which was called hydraulic power on the Massey tractors. The Ferguson 40 was used as the basis for the Massey-Ferguson 65 that was introduced in Britain in 1957. Industrial versions of the American TO series tractors included this reverse-drive TO30 with a Michigan loader. It's a rare machine, and very similar to one driven by Elvis Presley in the film Jailhouse Rock. Meanwhile, back in Britain, The replacement for the TE-20 was the Ferguson FE-35, which was launched at the Smithfield Show in December 1956. It was a much more advanced tractor than the TE-20, with several new features, including a 6-speed gearbox with a safety starter that would only operate with the gear ratio lever in neutral, new independent brake pedals, and revised hydraulics with position control, response control, and two-way draft control. The new instrument panel housed an oil pressure gauge and an ammeter, and live and ground speed power takeoff was available through an Auburn dual clutch. The FE-35 was based on the American TO-35. This was the design favoured by the Massey board in preference to the British LTX development. Most of the features of the American tractor were incorporated into the FE-35. It also had a more modern bonnet design, with a hinged top panel for filling the radiator and fuel tank. The engines for the FE-35 were still supplied by the Standard Motor Company. Petrol, TVO and lamp oil versions remained available, now improved and bored out to 87mm. The FE-35 is usually referred to as the grey and gold Ferguson, although the finish used on the engine and chassis was in fact a copper paint. This TVO FE-35 is being used with a Ferguson mid-mounted mower. The mower, like most of the implements in the new Massey Harris Ferguson range, was adapted from the original Ferguson line to suit the more powerful FE-35 tractor. Several Massey Harris machines were also absorbed into the range and rebadged as Ferguson equipment. The deluxe diesel FE-35 cost £558 when new. The deluxe version had live power takeoff, which was not available on the basic model, and a deeper padded seat. This tractor is using a Ferguson spinner to spread fertilizer. Most FE-35s were fitted with diesel engines. The new standard 23C diesel had an 84mm bore and had been uprated to 37 horsepower. It had a CAV rotary type DPA injection pump and several other improvements, including a cylinder head designed by the Ricardo company. Unfortunately, these modifications also made it difficult to start, and it was not the most popular engine on the market. Massey Harris Ferguson looked at several different diesel alternatives for the FE-35. Eventually, the Perkins 3152 engine was chosen. However, this rare experimental FE-35 was used to evaluate a Fordson Dexter engine. This cheaper version of the P3 engine was called the F3 and was jointly developed by Ford and Perkins. Unlike Perkins' own version, the F3 used an inline Sims fuel pump, and its castings were made of Dagenham. Variations on the FE35 included this industrial tractor, as well as a vineyard model. This industrial FE35 has the Standard Motor Company's diesel engine. The Ferguson forklift would have been a novel and very welcome labour-saving attachment for both farms and building sites when it was introduced in the 1950s. This tractor has the usual industrial features, including front and rear full-width mudguards, a dual braking system, and industrial rear tyres. The FE35 was the last of the Ferguson line. In 1957, the Massey Harris Ferguson Company was renamed Massey Ferguson, and in November the FE35 was relaunched as the Massey Ferguson 35, with a new red and grey livery. Apart from a name and colour change, the MF35 was identical to the Ferguson it replaced and continued to use Standard Motor Company engines. This is the TVO model. Spark ignition engines were now becoming less popular and were rarely fitted after 1959, when the standard 23C diesel was replaced by the Perkins 3152 engine. The red and grey 35 was the first of a long line of Massey Ferguson tractors. Banner Lane still accounts for nearly half of Massey Ferguson's worldwide production, and the factory built its 3 millionth tractor in 1996. Harry Ferguson's legacy lives on, not just in the design of the modern hydraulic system, but also in the thousands of Ferguson tractors working or in preservation across the world. The little grey Fergie has captured the hearts of all those who knew and worked it, and its popularity is unlikely to be diminished for generations to come.
Well, I'm rumbling in this JCB. I'm 5 years old, my dad's a giant sitting beside me, and the engine rattles my bum like berserk while we're singing, don't forget your shovel if you want to go and work. My dad's probably had a bloody hard day, but he's being good fun and bubbling and joking way. And the procession of cars stuck behind are getting all impatient and angry, but we don't mind. We're holding up the bypass, oh, me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, oh, sitting on the toolbox, oh, and I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school, oh no. And we pull over to let the cars pass, and pull off again, speeding by this summer green grass. And we're like giants up here in our big yellow digger, like Zoids or Transformers, or maybe even bigger. And I wanna transform into a Tyrannosaurus Rex and eat up all the bullies and the teachers and their pets. And I'll tell all my mates my dad's B.A. Baracus, only with a JCB and Bruce Lee's nunchuckers. And we're holding up the bypass, oh, me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, 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 sitting on the toolbox, oh, and I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school. And we're holding up the bypass, oh, me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, oh, I'm sitting on the toolbox, oh, and I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school. Said I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round and we're holding up the bypass, whoa, and me and my dad having a top laugh, oh, whoa. And I'm sitting on the toolbox, oh, and I'm so glad I'm not in school, boss, so glad I'm not in school. I said I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his, I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB. I'm Luke, I'm 5 and my dad's Bruce Lee. Drives me round in his JCB.